In 2014, I kind of felt in love with sales and started my first agent job. And I didn't know any mentor, didn't have any mentor by that time, started reading book as a crazy guy. And one of the first that came on my desk at that time was a book uh, which really changed the way I approached selling. That book is Zero Time Selling. And I'm happy to have Andy Paul, the author of that book, on the show. Hi, Andy.
Tobia, thanks for having me.
my
Great to
my
meet you.
pleasure. My pleasure. And thanks for being on the show. So I know that we were talking about this. Italy is pretty familiar with you, with your name, with your books, but probably someone of the audience doesn't know you. If you want to give us a few words, that would be great.
Sure. Gosh. Uh, really in the I spent a long time in sales, tech sales, primarily a lot of startups. I worked at Apple in the very early days of Apple. Then spent a number of years selling very large, complex communication systems around the world, um, running sales for some startups in the process that were involved in that. And then the last sort of 20, 23 years, I've had my own business, consulting business. I started really with the purpose to help small and mid-sized companies learn how to go compete for big deals and win big deals, competing against really big companies, which was sort of a specialty I had. And then 2010, 2011, I published my first book, Zero Time Selling, and that's now led to 3 books with a 4th one on the way, and started a podcast myself in 2015, which ended up getting acquired in 2020. We produced, 1,200 plus episodes of that. That was called, originally was called Accelerate, and then became called the Sales Enablement Podcast. And then, 6 months ago, started a brand new podcast called the Win Rate Podcast. And it's very exciting. It's a very different type of show. And it's a lot of fun to grow that.
Thanks for these answers. So just I want to just ask you a few questions on your first
Sure.
book because you know that it kind of changed my approach to selling,
Sure.
and it was I have to say that it shaped my way of selling because it was one of the first. So, and yeah, zero time selling. You mentioned it. So, if you want to tell us something more about it, because I think that it's really interesting, but it's still actual.
Hmm.
People can still read it and find the value and apply all the insights you give us today.
Well, I think something that's very consistent through everything I talk about with selling is that, and zero time selling is part of that is that there are certain things we can't control as salespeople. We cannot control product. We can't control pricing. We can't, we just don't have control over a number of things. But the thing we do have control over is ourselves and our actions that we take in order to help our buyers. And so one of the things that's always been hugely important for me in my career is this idea of being responsive to buyers, or responsiveness in general. And a lot of people think about that and think, oh, it's just, being fast to respond to things. And it's like, yeah, that's not really it, right? I mean, that's part of it. It's not about just being fast. It's about being complete, right? Is if somebody asks you a question and you respond back to them quickly, but you don't give them a complete information they need, you haven't been responsive. You responded, but you weren't responsive. And so it's this idea of saying, look, I have control over that. I have control over how quickly I respond to an email. I have control over how quickly, I work with the internal team if there's a question I couldn't answer myself to get the information I needed for the buyer. You know, and so as sellers, it's really important to say, look, the parts of you that you can control, parts of the job you can control, you want to be the best you can be at those. And there's nothing stopping you from being the best. My superpower in sales in the heart of my career was, my responsiveness. And because I had control over that. And I was selling deeply technical products, satellite communication systems. I'm not a technical person. I mean, pretty smart person. I mean, I could understand the technology from a lay person's perspective, from a non-technical perspective. I wasn't a sales engineer, anything like that. So in order to continue to add value to my buyers, what I learned is, well, I need to be able to help them make progress in their job toward making a decision. And because that's really the value they from as a salesperson. The value is, hey, can you help me get my job done? And so, yeah, I wouldn't necessarily always have the answers, but I was really good at making sure I could get the answers to them. Right. I mean, I was a world class helper, as I like to say. And that was in my control. And so I think it's really important for sellers to really look at their job from that perspective and say, what are the things I can control that will have an impact on the buyer and the buyer's experience with me as a salesperson, the buyer's journey they're going through, and to optimize for those.
That's a really interesting concept because I think mm, it's also clear in your last book, but controlling on the inside to control on the outside. As salespeople, everyone has told us that you gotta control this, control that, and control the process, but no one is teaching us how to control ourselves. So which is pretty crazy if we think
Well, but
about
and
it.
that's right. But that's another one of the things is you cannot control the buyer. I mean, this drives me nuts. Is people say take control of the deal? It's like you may feel you're in control, but you're not. The buyer's in control of the deal. And your ability to really control the buyer is minimal. What you can control is you, and you control the things that you do. And to that extent, then you can try to establish quote unquote control over the deal. But yeah, I've been in sales for, I almost hate to say it's 46 years. I mean, I've sold to companies of all sizes. I've sold to, you know, $5 million companies and Fortune 50 companies. And I've sold on every continent except Antarctica. And the one thing that's consistent through all that is you really don't have control over the deals. I mean, the only time you even have an element of control is, you get to the last week of the month, you're trying to close a deal and you give some big discount, right? That's artificial. That's not control over a deal. So the best you can do, the best you should aspire to is, yeah, control over yourself and the actions you take. And yes, you can help create momentum. Absolutely. That's in your favor that, you can sustain through the actions you take. But yeah, all the talk about controlling a deal, it's fiction.
I just want to go, and thanks for the answer. I just want to go a little bit back on zero time selling because what I got out of the book at that time was to how to structure my work. You identify these 10 essential steps and
Mhm.
to accelerate someone's, let's say, selling behaviors because it's all you talk about. I really
Mhm.
love one specific step, one of those specific steps, which is sell low.
Sure.
I mean, it's basically
Mhm.
so clear to me now after long years. Like you basically say don't overpromise and then you underdeliver. Okay. So now I want to talk about this together and to understand how we can apply this law today because you know better than me, most of us are not even hitting their quota. There is a lot of desperation around. We tend to overpromise to close the deal. And then as a consequence, we kind of underdeliver. So my question for you is how we can apply the sell low rule in today's selling
Well,
environment.
right. Well, I mean, the main part of what I called selling low was to say is you really need to target who you should be selling to more appropriately. And so I think that one of the most destructive things that sellers are taught is that you always need to talk to the C-suite. And the fact is, it's just not true. There are products and services that are sold that absolutely require being sold to the C-suite, but there are products and services that aren't and don't need to be. And so you sometimes run into this situation where sellers get so hung up on selling to, a CEO, let's say, is that it can work against you, right? And so it's this concept I call overselling, which is, I'll give you a story. An example is yeah, I was working for a company as general manager of this group, and we were designing a brand new product, and there was this chip manufacturer that wanted to make sure that we designed their chip into the product. And I and so he really, and it wasn't, we were in a big company, but so he really wanted to talk to the CEO. And I said, well, we've already got you designed in the product. Why do you want to talk to the CEO? He said, well, because my boss is telling me I've got to talk to the CEO. And I said, well, you really don't. But he kept insisting. And so then, sure, okay, finally, I set up a meeting with the CEO. It comes in, he makes this presentation. The CEO goes, I didn't really need to be in this meeting, but now that you asked for my opinion, I have one. They lost the deal. He he thought we should have somebody else that he would have been fine if we had gone to the market. We designed the product. He just happened to, the CEO happened to be this brilliant engineer, but so it was just like, dude, you did not. This was, you wasted this opportunity because you insist on talking to somebody that didn't have an opinion until you asked for it. And I've seen this play out multiple occasions where sellers insist on, it's like, hey, there are products. And I in the book, I provide a little graph for people to use, a chart people use to be able to chart out where the product sits on a scale of cost and complexity and risk that tells them how high within an organization they need to sell. And but you just have to be careful, we're all taught all these things as salespeople, and you accept them as the gospel truth, and oftentimes they're not, right? And so even in this case, I mean, this is my experience, this is what I believe, this is what I've seen, is you have to be really careful about not overselling, not selling too high too soon, understanding the difference between people that actually, stakeholders that actually have uh, a vote versus those that have approval rights, right? I mean, it's you just have to think your way through selling. And this is, one of the themes of zero time selling in all my books is, as salespeople, you have to operate with a level of intentionality and saying, why am I taking this action? What's going to happen when I take this action? You have to think things through, not just blindly follow a process because somebody told you to, but it's a real thinking person's profession, and it's a creative profession, and it's, selling, and it's, so yeah, just can't blindly follow advice, as you have to test things out. And when people, I said, are urged
Thanks
uniformly to say,
for the
sell as
answer.
high as you
It's
can, there are times and
I
places
think
for
it's
it, but
really
there are time and
actual
places
because
not to.
nowadays it seems that C you have to talk to the C level, and your C level has to talk to everyone. It seems that we are kind of passing these deals on top of our share. So yeah, we kind of passing these. We giving these deals up to. Uh, it's just crazy.
Kind
I
of
don't
what
know
with the
why
deals?
all this involvement when it's not needed.
Oh, well, yeah. Well, there's a time and a place for it, right? There's certain deals that require it. Not every deal requires it. And so what you're doing is, when you're involving people that don't need to be involved, because hey, this is what we do, this, we always make sure, it's like, yeah, they don't all have to be that way, is you're adding time into the equation. And when you add time into unnecessary time into the sales equation, you increase the level of uncertainty. And why do you want to make things less certain? Right? When you introduce new players into the game, you increase the probability of something going wrong. If you didn't need to, right? Sometimes you need to, so you do, right? Sometimes you have to. And I've had many deals I worked on where, we had to have everybody in the company involved and engaged with their opposite numbers and in the buying organizations and so on. But yeah, it's again, we have to think about it because they don't all require that. And yeah, I give an example I've talked about several times on my podcast is a client that was talking to the CEO, and they just won the biggest deal in the company's history, and they did a really good job of documenting all the meetings they had and all the demos they did and da da da. And I looked at that briefing after they'd won the deal. I went to the CEO. I said, congratulations. But I said, here's the bad news. It took so much time. You had so many meetings. You can't afford to do another deal like that this year because you don't have the manpower. And they just spent way too much time. They had too many meetings. For a deal that size, and so what it spoke to is they were quite ineffective in the meetings they were having, right? Because they weren't getting across the point they needed to get across more succinctly and making people understand, or maybe they as sellers didn't really understand what the buyer was trying to accomplish. So they took them too many meetings to figure that out. But the point is, as sellers, you want to, the whole theory behind the book Zero Time Selling is that, theoretically you should be able to become so effective in selling that, every
And talking
interaction
about
takes quote
books,
unquote zero time,
let's
right?
talk about your
But so it's like that,
last book.
that's what we're aiming
You
for. We're trying to
published
get
in
this
February
continuous
2022. You published
improvement
Sell
in our
Without Selling
effectiveness so we
Out.
can continue
And,
to ratchet down
I
the amount of
reached out
time
because
we consume
after
from the
I read
buyer,
Sell
most
Without Selling
importantly,
Out, it
as well
seems
as
like
ourselves.
a kind of suggestions from a friend who tells me, look, you should do this, and that. If it has a curious structure, it seems that you really want
Yeah.
to help the person who reads the book without any kind of, there are frameworks, but without any intention to sell your service. I don't know how to put this in a better way. It's like a friend giving me his long time career advices, and I can just go out and do the job. So if you want to give us a few words about the book, I'm interested in really understanding how to come out with the idea, and why did you decide to write the book in that way?
Well, yeah. um, well, that's a good question. My mission, my passion, the thing I really focus on is I think that everybody has it within them to succeed at some level. And I think that what's happened so much in selling in the last 15, 20 years, it's all become about a detailed step-by-step process. This is what you need to do. And I don't think that works, right? I think every human being that's involved in sales is different from the next person. They've got different strengths, they've got different uh, aptitudes, and they're dealing with another human being who's a buyer, right? And so everyone necessarily has their own way of selling. And the goal of the book is to say, well, here's just sort of this framework of calling selling in as opposed to selling out, based on these four basic principles. I think that I call them the pillars of selling in, that I think if people really work at mastering this, then that's all they need as a seller. And so the four pillars are connection, curiosity, understanding, and generosity, meaning our ability to connect with another human being at a human level, right? As just an authentic person. That opens the door to trust, building trust. And trust is so crucial for being able to be consistently good at sales, right? And then survey after survey have come out. I mean, Gartner had one early in 2023 saying, look, the number one factor cited by business to B2B buyers, number one factor influencing their decision, trustworthiness of the seller, right? So trust is built on this connection that you have with somebody. So you can build this connection, credibility, and trust. When that happens, what happens is then the buyer opens the door to you when you start asking the questions you want to ask to really understand what's going on with them, and what they want to try to achieve and how you might be able to help them. So trust opens the door to curiosity, the second pillar. And you'll use your curiosity to reach a level of understanding. Now, this is a problem for sellers because in these, you look at these so many sales methodologies. You look at things like Medic and MedPick that are basically sort of questionnaires. Is you're checking a box? Yeah, I got the answer, right? So we're really good as sellers to gather information. What we're not very good at is really understanding the context of that information and why it's important to the buyer, right? And what it says about what the buyer wants to achieve. So the third pillar is understanding. How do you transcend just knowing something to truly understanding what's most important to the buyer at this point in time? And that's really, as I write about in Sell Without Selling Out, that's really your job as a salesperson. Your job is to, is to listen to your buyer, understand the things that are most important to them, and then help them get that, right? I want to understand what's most important to you and I want to help you get that. Well, that leads to the fourth pillar, which is generosity. How do we give without the expectation of return in order to help somebody achieve something in their lives? And if we do that, we will be rewarded. We will get something, right? But if we're only after, helping them with the expectation that they're going to give us something in return, then it may not work. So it's an approach that says, look, this is purely buyer centric. I am here to help you, and I'm going to help you through these, my connection, be able to connect, build trust, curiosity to help you understand what you're trying to achieve, the level of understanding, and then the generosity to help. If you can do that, it's pretty simple. And that's I sort of I've mentioned, I can't remember if I talked about it in that book, but I mentioned other books. Is again, part of my goal with everything I do is to make sellers understand that selling really is simple. Not easy. It's not easy, but it is simple. And if you can just keep that in mind, there's gosh, just I just need to be able to connect. I need to be able to ask great questions. And in the book, I've got 6 question types you can ask that really help surface information you need to truly understand the buyer, with the third pillar. And then once you've got that level of understanding, and this is such a critical thing for sellers, is because so much of selling is sort of checklist oriented these days, and so on, is if you don't understand the buyer, really missing an opportunity to say, well, geez, how can I propose a
That's a good point.
solution
And I mean,
if
these
I don't really
basic
understand what they're
principles
trying to achieve?
is it's just how you combine
And
them.
that
You know what I
contributes
mean?
to a
It's
lot of
like
lost deals. Or if you really
every
had that
other
level of understanding,
good thing, every
and
other
you can
simple
confirm
good
that the
thing in
level of
life
understanding with the
is
buyer,
maybe the
they
basic
think that's a
elements are
tremendous
the
source of
same,
value, because
but
it's
the
like,
way you
oh, we want to do
combine
business
them
with Tobia
makes
because
makes the
he
real
really gets
difference. And
us, right?
I have
He
a question
really gets
about the
us. He really
checklist and the
understands.
methodology topic you touched
That's
before.
huge.
I want to know from you.
So anyway, yeah,
I mean,
connection, curiosity, understanding,
you
generosity.
have been a trainer since a while, so I'd like to know if you think that sales methodologies are about to, disappear. Because I see a lot of a lot of companies are still like replacing them with more, let's say, thinking orientated trainings.
Sure. No. Yeah, I unfortunately, yeah, no, I don't see them being replaced because, you know, I don't want to sound cruel when I talk about those people, but methodologies are something that people can blame failure on. And so, hey, I I followed the methodology you taught us, and it just, didn't work. And part of the reason they don't work is that, you know, people don't have sort of this underlying philosophy of what they're trying to do. And it's a tough word to get sellers to think about. But yeah, if you look at, my books and so on, there's a coherent philosophy that runs through them about how you should act as a human toward other people, how you should act towards your buyers and your job. And I know personally, in my podcast area, lots of really top performers, they all have that, right? They've all developed this set of principles, let's say, if not a philosophy, about how they operate in life and how they operate in business. And if you bring that to a methodology, then the methodology, sure, can exist, but it's almost secondary because it's really the principles that come down. But if you're not rooted in principles, then you're bound to fail. And there's a great quote from famous American author Ralph Waldo Emerson. He was a philosopher back in the 1800s. It basically paraphrased, and he said, "Look, there's a million methods, but methods, uninformed by principles, just aren't going to succeed." And I think it's really true, and it makes it much harder. So I think that's why I like to deal certain frameworks for sellers to say, look, here are the things that are really important. I think as a human dealing with a buyer, here are the things that are really important to the buyers, what they're trying to achieve. If you can connect those dots, there's lots of different ways to do it. But if you can do it in a way that you're perceived by the buyer as being a trustworthy source of help and advice and so on, then your probability of winning the opportunity and winning the deal goes up. And this is something that sellers really need to think about is we really are in the business of probabilities. So every action we take is either going to increase our probability of winning the deal or decreasing our probability of winning the deal. And so you should have that mindset to say, look, yeah, in this call that's coming up, what do we need to achieve that's going to help the buyer make progress toward making their decision? Well, if we don't accomplish that in that
Thanks
call,
for the answer. I
we've
have a
actually
lot of questions
probably
for you,
decreased our
Andy. So sorry
probability
about
of
that.
winning the deal.
But the first one is that because I want to go back to that point,
And so if you
to
really
your
think, well,
last
geez,
question.
why do I need to
Basically,
prepare to such a
you
level at this
say let's
call
put the
for
human
this
being
meeting, let's say?
at
It's like, well,
the center again
hey,
instead of
if you're prepared and it's a
focusing
good
on
meeting, you increase your
everything
probabilities
that
of winning
can
the deal.
be
If it's not a good meeting
process
and you sort of
or
wasted the buyer's time or it
excessive
wasn't very
control
productive,
driven, let me put it in
then
this way.
you've
But the question
decreased your
I have for
probability of
you
winning
is
the deal.
what's the most difficult thing nowadays for a seller to become that effective?
Sure. That's fine. Hmm. Well, it's overcoming the fear that if they don't act like everybody else, that they're going to fail. And I think one of the things we've seen the growth of in the last n number of years, especially with sort of the growth of sales technologies, is that there's this greater emphasis on people sort of being like other sellers, right? I mean, we're going to listen to our calls and our recordings of our calls, and then we're going to listen to the calls from Tobia. And Tobia's call is fantastic. He's better than everybody else. So everybody be like Tobia. They can't be. They're not Tobia. They're Andy. They're John. They're David. They're never going to be Tobia. So there might be some things they can learn from it, but there's been this emphasis on conformity. Everybody's sort of being the same, and that's not useful. That's not helping a seller. As as managers, yeah, we want to use this technology, wonderful technology that exists to help people become the best version of themselves. And so yeah, it's problematic. It's why people don't adopt things is because they're being encouraged is to be like somebody else. And in sales, you never want to, well, even in life, you don't want to compare yourself against somebody else. You want to compare yourself against who you were yesterday and the day before that, right? I mean, you yourself are always the benchmark of comparison, not somebody else. And so sellers can get this mindset is look, I'm just trying to improve every day, every time I can, take advantage of this opportunity. I'm going to keep an open mind. And also yeah, I'm going to treat the job as one that's, this I mentioned before, it's really this creative profession. I mean, one that for me, what's kept me in sales all these years is just like, yeah, every time you get into a new deal, there's something new about it. I'm not trying to make it like another deal. It's this deal, right? And it's unfortunately, I said, I think one of the trends in sales that's really been destructive in the last 10, 15, 20 years is we want to put everything into a box. This deal is just like that box, and this person's just like that person. So it's like, no, they're not. Understanding that they're different becomes your superpower. I mean, that's that. Think about that. As a seller, being able to embrace ambiguity really becomes your superpower because you can spot the opportunities in it. Marketing these days goes such length to say, okay, here's our ICP, here's the persona you're going to talk to. Now, if you ask these questions, these are things they're interested in, that's fine. That's useful information to a point, right? But when you start assuming that that's the answers you're going to get and they're going to fit in certain, you're missing the opportunities because acumen, my belief is, in sales is not about knowing how one situation is like another situation. It's about understanding how they're different, right? Because when you understand and spend the time to understand, truly understand and spot the differences, then you've got opportunities that perhaps your competitors haven't spotted. And if you can walk into and embrace those opportunities, then that's where you win. And so it's moving as sellers. It's not
Absolutely.
allowing
And
yourself to be
I think
sort
that you
of put
touched a
into
really
this
interesting point now
automated,
about
mechanized, cookie
things
cutter
being
approach to
similar.
selling, but
I
saying
think
taking
3 4 days
responsibility
ago,
individually for
I
becoming the
pulled
best version of
a few
yourself,
reports
being
from
really
my
thoughtful and
outbound
intentional about the
activities,
actions you take.
and I realized
Yeah,
that the
embrace
highest
that
rate of
and
failure
don't worry
was
about the
when
fear,
me
right, of
and my
not being
team
like anybody
approached the
else.
people like, we
Is
have just done
that's
this in a
actually
company that
makes you
looks like
more
yours.
vulnerable,
And so the
doesn't
answer from
solidify your
on the other
position.
side was, how do you know that I'm just like them? You assume that I'm like them.
Hmm. Exactly, but that's how we train salespeople, and this drives me crazy because we think it's a form of social proof to say, "Oh, well, we've worked with dozens of companies just like yours." And what the buyer is hearing is, to your point precisely, what they're hearing is, "Well, sure, outwardly we're in the same business, but the way we think about our business is differently. Our culture is differently. The way we deal with our customers is different. We are unique. We're similar, but we're unique." But we train sellers to say, well, everybody's the same, right? And so when the buyer hears you say, yeah, we work dozens of companies just like yours, what they're saying is, well, they don't really understand me, right? Because I'm not like the other people. And that's such a great point you brought up because this is, as a salesperson, if you're looking out into the future, this ability to seek out what is unique and to understand what's truly unique about your buyers and the stakeholders and the companies and so on, that's something AI is not able to do. right? I mean, for all its virtues and all the power it'll have, and we're much, further away from sort of this, general AI, intelligence is that this is a real human thing, is to be able to look someone in the eyes and really understand that, yeah, they've got a unique perspective on this. And if I can talk to that unique perspective in the conversations we're having and the things we're talking about, then yeah, I have a chance to separate ourselves from a competition because they're not going to really understand them as well as we do. So, and this is sort of been substantiated by studies have been done relative to, excuse me, studies in the medical decision assist systems using AI to help patients make decisions about medical treatment. And there's one study that's been done in the United States, and I forget which medical school it was, but basically, their patients sort of reach a level where they stop trusting these AI-driven systems as much. And when the researchers were sort of curious to find out, and they asked them why, what the patient said is, well, yeah, I may have a form of cancer like everybody else, 100,000 other people do, but no one feels the pain the way I do. No one experiences the discomfort the way I do. And the machine just can't understand that, right? Well, your buyers are the same way. They're human beings. They all look at the world through their unique lenses. And we think it makes it easier as sellers to treat them as if they're the same as everybody else. Actually, it makes it more difficult.
I think that this
And the
is a
easiest thing to
point
do
that
is to
you
show up,
touched.
be
Yeah, I
human,
mean, you
and
deep
get to
dive into
really
this point about
understand
generative AI
what
into another podcast I
what their
recently
real issue
listened
is,
on
what's really
XIQ,
driving, what's the
probably.
opportunity they're trying to
XIQ
achieve, why
website.
they
Yeah, I think so.
feel
For
they're
the
different than
audience,
other
if you,
companies.
when you finish
And when you get
listening
to
to
that
this,
level,
just jump on XIQ
yeah, you make your life
website
easier.
and just listen to the other one,
I
because
mean,
Andy
again,
really
people think it's
deep
the
dives
easy
into
button to
it
push
and
to say,
finds
yeah, we
more
treat this
than
in this
one,
automated,
let's say,
cookie cutter
way
approach to one
to
buyer. Says,
prove
no, you're
that
making your life
human is still
harder.
center of, and sellers are still at the center of selling and will be. So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, there is a range of products that don't need a human being to help a buyer make a purchase decision. And the range of products encompassed by that is growing, right? That's just inevitable. It's just growing. But there are always going to be lots and lots of products and services where the buyer needs the seller's help in order to make a decision. And you have to sort of think about this as seller is buyers don't talk to you because they want to talk to you. They talk to you because they need to talk to you. If they didn't need your help, they wouldn't talk to you. It's that simple. So if you're a seller and you have the
thanks
benefit
for this
and
answer,
the great
Andy. I
opportunity
think
to
that we
talk to
are
a
about
buyer and
to
they're willing to
end,
invest their
like,
time in you,
almost there, but I
what do they
just
need
want to
from
ask
you?
you a
What's the
few
help they
questions
need
more. The first one is,
in order to
you
help
said at the
them make
beginning
their decision? And it could
another
come in various
book
forms, right? Depending on what
is down
stage of
the
the
road,
deal
like
you're
you're
at and so on.
finishing it.
But if they're
Did I
talking to
miss
you, they
something? Do you want to
need
say
your
something
help.
more about this new
Otherwise,
book?
they wouldn't talk to you. So that's just as sellers just need to have this, get it straight. It's that simple. Sure. Yes. Uh, no, I mean it's book two of a series after Sell Without Selling Out. So it deals with some of the
That's a good news. And I have one
same
last
themes, but it
question,
is really focused on this
which
idea
is something that I really want to ask
how
you.
you
So
really help
if
buyers.
you should
And
give just one advice
yeah, no, I
to
think,
a young
and also
seller who's
how
probably,
you
um,
do it in a
was
way
not
that you
really
consume
reaching his
less of the buyer's time
numbers
and less of
and
your
thinking
time.
about leaving
And
the
so yeah,
job, because now
it's
we have
at
a
this
lot
point
of
probably coming out
turnarounds, a lot of turnover in
2025.
sales.
Don't have an
So
exact date yet,
what kind
but
of advice would you
yeah, I'm hoping to
give
finish it up
him
here
or
in the next
her?
month or so. Sure. Mm, sure. Right. Yeah. Well, it's hard advice, but you have to find your way of selling. You have to find your voice, if you will, um, in sales, and it's not easy because I talked about, fan. There's this great pressures for starting at the management, senior management level, all the way down. They want people to sort of conform to a process, and this is the way we do it. And hey, we do medic or medpic, blah 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 blah. It's like, sure, but within those frameworks, is you have to figure out what your strengths are. What are the things, parts of the job you enjoy? What are the parts you don't enjoy? What can you improve? What if you envision, what it would be like working a deal that you won, that then you want to win more deals like that. Go through that thought exercise and then say, well, where's the gap between where I am and where I want to be, and work on those things. You have to take control of your career. And yeah, the subtitle of my last book, Sell Without Selling Out, was A Guide for Success on Your Own Terms. And that really was it. Is, no one cares about you. Not to make it sound too bad, but you have to have this this attitude, because it's basically the truth. Is, companies that you work for, they don't really care about your success, right? Even really benevolent employers, there's limits, right? As someone who's worked in the tech industry and has been laid off before and so on, I mean, it's all there. So you have to look out after yourself in terms of your development. You have to take responsibility for your own development as a sales professional and as a professional in general. And sometimes that path is maybe a little bit different than the path that the person you work for thinks you should be doing. So what? It's your path, it's your career. Is If your boss can't support you, then go find a boss who will, because they're out there. And your success as a salesperson, ultimately, and you'll look back on your career and you'll see the truth of this, is based on the situation you put yourself in, right? Yes, it is based on the way you develop yourself and you develop your skills, but that only works to a certain degree. And at some point, you have to put yourself in the right situation. You read, on LinkedIn, other places, about these sellers. Oh, I've made seven figures. And there's some absolutely true. I mean, there's a gentleman named Brandon Fluharty who, is a former client of mine, coaching client. I coached Brandon in his first $1 million year. Um, but he'll tell you, right? He couldn't have done it just anywhere. You had to find the right situation that aligns with your skills. You got the right manager, you got the right bosses, you got the right culture, you got the right product. There's lots of things that factor into it. So, sort of two parts to answer the questions. One is work on yourself constantly, right? Develop this vision of who you are and the way you want to sell. And for me, I did this, and I talk about this in Sell Without Selling Out. Yeah, I just knew I was never going to be able to survive in sales if I had to sell the way they were training me to sell. But I wanted to, I was competitive enough and self-competitive enough to want to prove people wrong. A little chip on my shoulder. So yeah, I developed my own style that's, like everybody's got their own unique style. So develop your style of selling, your philosophy of selling, your principles of
Thank you
selling,
so much, Andy.
and then find the right
And
situation to sell
thank you
in.
for,
If you combine those two,
really accepting this
and think about
invitation.
next time
I
you're looking
really
for a
had a
job,
lot of fun in this
instead of saying I'm
conversation,
looking for a
learned a few
job, say you're
things,
looking to hire a
and
boss,
thank you.
right?
And I really hope that.
So it's not just any
Oh,
job.
yeah,
You're not
we
just looking
didn't
for a
talk
job, but
about
you want to hire a
football.
boss.
So
Somebody that
whenever
can
you
help you
want,
continue to grow, someone that
we
will
can have a
support you in the
full
way you need to
episode
be
on
supported to succeed. And if you do that,
talking
then
about, yeah, talking
yeah,
about
you're more
Napoli,
likely
talking
to
about
achieve what you
Milan,
want to
talking
achieve.
about whatever you want. So thank you so much, Andy. Really, it was a real pleasure, and I'm looking forward to invite you again as soon as the book is out.
I did too.
Thank you, Andy. Bye.
And we didn't even talk football yet. A full episode of football. There we go. Talk about Milan. Yes, yes. Oh, anytime. Thank you. This was fun. Yes, we'll do it. We'll do it for sure. Thank you to you.